Namaskar. In this series, our next topic is research methods. Some of you may be non-psychology students. So, for you, it's very important to know how do we do research in psychology, because I'll share number of research findings. So, if you don't know about research journey, then that could be incomplete story, how certain results have been concluded, have been collected, and we are discussing about those results. On the other hand, for psychology students, just a revision. Psychological information is based on empirical evidence. When I am saying empirical evidence, it means we go in the field and collect data, and after analyzing the data, we have certain results and then we share certain findings. So, empirical research methods include, first of all, collection of data. Then we do analysis of this data, and there are various techniques to analyze this data as per quantitative research methods, as per qualitative research methods, which I will discuss in today's class. Interpretation of data then we have, and then we have result discussion and particular conclusions, and then share final research findings. So, if we talk about even definition of psychology, we have focused on science as well as on scientific method. If you could recall definition of psychology, it was psychology is a scientific study of behavior and cognitive processes. It means we focus on science as well as on scientific methods. When I am saying scientific methods, it means a set of assumptions we follow, rules and procedures that scientists use to conduct empirical research. So, some set of assumptions, rules and procedures we follow during empirical research. There are various bases of scientific research or scientific research method. Making observation in a systematic way. We follow certain patterns or certain steps to do a research or very systematic plan we have here. Following strict rules of evidence, and we collect data on the basis of evidences. We are saying this is the way of analyzing our data, or these are the results. So, there is no scope of subjectivity. Most of the time we follow certain data collection techniques, we collect data and very objectively we observe what is happening in these results. Critical thinking about evidence. These are not simple patterns, but we critically analyze this data as well as these evidences, and then only we talk about our results. Broadly, if we just say different researches in psychology, then psychology has 4 basic goals. We do research to describe human behavior and cognitive processes or mental processes. So, in some of our researches, our focus is to describe human behavior and cognitive processes. Sometimes we take interest to explain certain behavior or cognitive processes or mental processes. In other researches, our main agenda or objective could be to predict human behavior and cognitive processes. So, on the basis of theories, on the basis of various principles as well as our obtained results, we can predict human behavior or can say what kind of behavior would be displayed by the participants in the given situation. As you know, in confirmatory research, such kind of hypotheses as well as plans we have. In some cases, we study changes in behavior and mental processes, especially if we have some say counseling sessions or psychotherapeutic sessions or maybe intervention programs. So, in all these cases, we had something special in between pre and post testing, and that is why we are interested to observe certain changes in behavior, and we document in our research what kind of changes or effectiveness we observed in our research. There are various types of researches, and on the basis of applications, on the basis of objectives as well as on inquiry mode, we can have various subdivisions of type of research. Let us take first application. When we say application, then there could be 2 type of researches. One, basic research or pure research, in which our objective is to understand human behavior as well as to establish certain principles, certain models, certain theories to describe human behavior. On the other hand, in other type of researches, we may focus more on applications. When I am saying applications, it means we go in the field and try to find out certain psychological problems in the society. And maybe in another research, we are trying to find out what are the solutions of these problems. So, our main focus in such kind of researches are to explore solutions of the problem or identify certain problems in the society or in a community. Another type is objectives. On the basis of objectives, researches can be divided in two parts. One, descriptive research, and second, exploratory research. In descriptive research, we describe particular research, and our interest is to understand human behavior in the given situation, or in our research question, that is the main agenda. On the other hand, in exploratory research, our objective is to explore some new ideas. For example, broadly there could be two type of researches. I will discuss this point once again in next slides, confirmatory versus exploratory researches. When I am saying exploratory researches, our hypotheses are more based on hunches, more based on certain ideas. We are not very much confirmed about the hypothesis. We are exploring them first time. So, exploratory research design we could have in for such type of researches. On the basis of inquiry mode, there could be two type of researches, quantitative research as well as qualitative research. In quantitative research, for example, experimental method and various other methods we have, in such kind of researches, we convert human behavior in numbers, and then we play with numbers by using certain statistical techniques like t-test, ANOVA, correlation, regression, and various other statistical techniques. And then we define human behavior, and sometime even we predict about human behavior, as well as we study effectiveness of certain programs through such kind of techniques. On the other hand, in qualitative research, for example, case study, interview method, focus group discussions, in these type of researches, we focus more on qualitative data. And in such kind of researches, we do in-depth research, or in-depth certain phrases help us to define human behavior. Let us know how psychologists conduct research. There are various research methods like experimental method, quasi-experimental method, observation method, survey method, focus group discussion, case studies, interviews, psychological testing, projective techniques, etc. If I compare first three, experimental method, quasi-experimental method and observation method, then all these three methods have their own merits and demerits. Let us talk first of all about experimental method. The goal of the experimental research is to provide more definitive conclusions about the causal relationship among the variables in the research hypothesis. This is most rigorous research method, and here we are able to study in terms of cause and effect, because we manipulate a variable called independent variable and see its impact on dependent variable, and all other variables, especially if they may have impact on dependent variable, we are supposed to control all those variables in experimental setting, and that is why this effect is purely in terms of cause and effect. So, cause, independent variables impact on dependent variable. This is more scientific research method, as I mentioned earlier also, and here actually it is higher than correlational method or correlational studies, in which we are just saying that there is correlation between two variables. I will discuss this point once again in next slide. So, first let us know about independent variable and dependent variable. The independent variable is the causing variable that is created or manipulated by the experimenter. So, mainly in experimental designs or experimental method, experimenter manipulate a variable, an independent variable, and see its impact on dependent variable. So, dependent variable is which is influenced by the experimental manipulations, and this is again I am repeating most scientific research method in psychology. On the other hand, field research in which we do experiments, but in the natural situation. It means if I am delivering a particular intervention program in the classroom setting or in a community or in a society or in an organization. So, in all these settings are natural, and independent variable manipulation is there. So, that is why field experiments experiments conducted in the real situation or in natural situation. On the other hand, in naturalistic observation, we just observe the situation and then describe human behavior. There are two very important variables or factors which are actually in terms of advantages as well as disadvantages can be counted. One is control and another is naturalistic, because these are the variables which may be counted as advantages as well as disadvantages of a particular study. So, if we say talk about control, it means in naturalistic observation we can't control anything, and this is actually very natural situation. On the other hand, in field research or field experiments, to some extent we can. On the other hand, in laboratory experiment, because it is happening in a lab, so whichever factors or variables or extraneous variables we want to control, we can control them easily. Its merit demerits I will discuss later. On the other hand, naturalistic, because that is also very important variable for us, because research conducted in a particular setting, but we apply it in naturalistic situation. When an experiment happened in a particular setting, we are not saying it happened in an experimental setting. We are describing human behavior like in natural setting. So, that is why this is also very important factor for us. In laboratory experiments, it is the least one. On the other hand, in field research, middle one, and natural situation in naturalistic observation very much at high level. One more point which I discussed in last slide also. Once again, there is difference between correlational studies and in terms of cause and effect studies. In terms of correlational studies, we are able to say these two variables are correlated with each other positively, negatively, or there is no correlation. On the other hand, we are not able to say first variable is cause of another one, or impacting it negatively or positively, because in correlational studies we do not have any causality. For causality, we have to have another type of research design, in which we are able to study in terms of cause and effect or in experimental setting. So, for example, this is one example here. Suppose in a correlational study, we observed that weight gain and increased income, these are highly correlated with each other. On the basis of this correlational study, we are not able to say, or we should not say weight gain is cause of increased income, or increased income is cause of weight gain. That is faulty understanding if we have such kind of, because on the other hand we are able to say, and we are definitely can say weight gain and increased income, these are highly correlated with each other, because when we do in depth research, we could find certain variable which is contributing to both of them and cause of for both of them, and that is why it's these two are correlated. For example, in this research, age is the factor, and with age weight is increasing as well as increased income is there, and because of this variable, this cause, these two variables are highly correlated with each other. Similarly, when we do experiments, there are two important factors here. In some cases, we do exploratory research. Exploratory research means we have hunches only, we are not much confident on our hypothesis, and exploring it first time, that is why we are not much sure on our hypothesis, and this hypothesis prove or disproved level will give certain message to us, and then in future we may have more confirmation. On the other hand, certain researches we have on the basis of confirmation. confirmatory factor research. When I am saying confirmatory research, it means study is based on particular theory, theory is well established, and that is why we are more confident when we have our hypothesis. And on the basis of both type of studies or researches, we do prediction, and then finally evidence based research we have, but it applies on psychological testing also. In exploratory research, when we develop first psychological test, then we do exploratory factor analysis, because we do not know which factors would be revealed in this particular study, which is designed for psychological test construction. So, that is why we do exploratory factor analysis. On the other hand, if we just in the series of the researches doing next level research, then that is confirmatory. So, we do confirmatory factor analysis, and in confirmatory factor analysis we just go with this theoretical interpretation, and we are just confirming whether this factor solution is confirmed in the next study or not. So, I think that this point should be very clear to you. There is two agendas or 2 points which are different on the basis of exploratory research as well as confirmatory research. Observation method, quasi experimental method and experimental method quite clear to you now, and as well as their comparison. Next method is survey methods. In these survey methods, we ask people's opinion, and on the basis of these opinions we write our research, and these opinions are based on our research question. You must understand clear-cut difference between simple questionnaires, surveys and psychological test, because psychological test actually standardized tools, an objective and standardized measure of a sample of behavior. On the other hand, in survey or in simple questionnaires, we have series of questions, and these questions are not standardized first before doing research. So, this is difference between surveys, questionnaires and psychological test. Next method may be focus group discussion. In focus group discussion, we ask certain questions to a group on the basis of our research question, and in this case actually it goes to and fro. So, you are asking some questions, in between participants interacting with each other, as well as in between they may ask something to experimenter or researcher, and that way actually this focus group discussion is going on and maybe being recorded, or data has been collected by using certain other ways, and then finally we analyze this focus group discussions, and then we write our research report. In some cases we also have case studies. However, it is more applied in clinical psychology, in which our interest is to understand a particular case. So, for understanding this case, we may use number of research methods, say psychological testing, projective techniques, or maybe some other techniques can be used, or the data which is with this person, for example, his life history, academic record, information from parents or friends, or any other ways which we find these are valid to collect this information, or then we have interpretation of this particular case. Another method is interviews. In interviews, we follow broadly 3 type of interviews: structured interviews, unstructured interviews, and then semi-structured interviews. In structured interviews, we have structured way of doing interview, and we are not able to make certain changes in between if we want. On the other hand, in unstructured interviews, we have free floating interview. Whatever we want to ask, we can ask. These two are extremes, and middle path is semi-structured interview. In this type of interview, we know what are our main agendas or questions, and we have liberty to mold them as per the requirement. So, that is why in interviews, semi-structured interviews are identified best option, because this option has least limitations of structured as well as unstructured interviews. Next two methods are psychological testing and projective techniques. In projective techniques, we just provide certain pictures to the participant and ask to write a story. So, when we are asking to write a story, then we think, or that is our hypothetical assumption, this person is, or participant is, writing about his personality, writing about his anxieties, depression, or negative emotions as well as positive emotions, his motivation and various other things. So, broadly in the story, it's his personality is reflecting, and that way we analyze these stories and try to find out about this person's personality, motivation, desires, needs, etc. Similarly, sometime we have meaningful pictures, and in these meaningful pictures like TAT, we ask certain questions again. Broadly, these questions are: what is past, present and future of this particular scene? So, in this case, again we assume person is writing about his past, about his present as well as his future, as well as his interpersonal relations with other people, and this is the way to analyze this data. However, these projective techniques, which are quite important, especially in psychoanalytic approach or psychodynamic approach, they use projective techniques for data analysis as well as sometime for treating or to identify clinical patients' problem. So, these are quite common and popular in clinical setup. On the other hand, if we compare with psychological testing, I think these are lesser reliable and valid comparatively. So, next technique is psychological testing. In psychological testing, an objective and standardized measure of a sample of behavior. Let us discuss a little bit more about psychological testing, because psychological testing is very important for us. You would find in positive psychology maximum researches are based on psychological testing. So, in next classes when I will say happiness level is lower or higher of a particular group, or maybe in some cases we are saying that this type of personality has higher level of happiness as compared to other one. So, most of the time we use various psychological tests to capture these factors or these constructs, and then we do statistical analysis, and after doing this analysis we say what kind of research findings we had in this research. Let us know a little bit about psychological tests. An objective and standardized measure of a sample of behavior it is, as Anastasi stated in 1990. It means it is an objective way of collecting data. We have certain statements and person has to respond these statements. So, it is very objective way, there is no scope of subjectivity when we are using psychological test, and these are standardized measures of a sample of behavior which we collect during psychological testing. What does it mean by standardization? Standardization means uniformity of procedure in administering and in the scoring procedure. So, we have very uniform style or procedure when we administer a psychological test as well as when do scoring of the psychological test. Psychological test can be systematically scored, administered and used to measure individual differences. So, this is another definition can be counted for psychological testing. They are supported by a body of evidence and statistical data which demonstrate their reliability and validity. This point I will discuss once again in the next slide. Three main characteristics of a psychological test should be there: high level of reliability. Reliability means consistency and temporal stability of the scores, so that we can rely on these results. On the other hand, validity, degree to which a test procedure accurately measure what it was designed to measure, or can say mainly it is along with various validities, construct validity. There should be clear cut connection between this particular construct or operational definition of this construct and the item nature of items, I should say. This point again I will discuss in next slide. Norms, because you just see in terms of say percentile, we compare particular score with the norms which we have already developed at the time of test construction, and that is why we are able to say what does it mean the score which you have obtained. For example, say on intelligence you had 90 IQ. So, if we do not have norms from your culture, from your group, from your age as well as gender, then we are not able to understand what does it mean. 90 score means we do not know much about it, but if we have norms then and able to convert it in IQ, then immediately we can say, oh, your level is below average or above average. So, it means when I am saying norms, you are compared with your age group, gender group, culture group, and then we are saying that what is your level as per this particular group. So, these three are very important for us. Next point is how do we construct a psychological test. As I mentioned, it is not like surveys or not like questionnaires. So, these are actually standardized tools. When I am saying standardized tools, it means we do separate research to develop a psychological test, and at the end of this course I will discuss number of psychological tests which we have developed here in Indian setting. So, when I am saying various steps for test construction, let us revise or let us understand them one by one. First is define construct. This is very interesting in psychology because there could be number of definitions when we say personality, or when we say happiness, or when we say intelligence. Number of definitions are available. So, first of all you have to decide what is your operational definition, and if you know your operational definition, then only you could start your research journey to develop a psychological test. For example, let us understand this point with this example. These are various models of happiness which I will discuss in later classes, but here just to understand when we say define constructs, what does it mean? It means there are various models or theories to describe particular construct in psychology. So, with which construct or theory you are moving on to develop a psychological test, that is our first point. For example, in this case as I discussed with you, I will explain all these models later in happiness class, but here we should know one model is which is saying that happiness is cognitive and affective component, another saying that it is combination of 6 factors, another saying that this is combination of 5 factors. On the other hand, mental health continuum, this is another model of happiness which is saying that it is a combination of emotional well-being, psychological well-being and social well-being. So, in all these models these definitions are totally different, and that is why we should know what is the operational definition of this construct which we are going to develop a psychological test. That is very important for us, and you would find say for example say 50 research papers on happiness. So, first step when you are reading these research paper is to know what is operation definition in this particular research. If you know operation definition, then you can understand it in better way. One another point which is again I will discuss when applications of psychological testing we would be having. We have scaling off. In psychological testing we have forced choice answers. Forced choice answers means say 5-point Likert scale, or say 7-point or 9-point or 11-point. Let us take example of this 5-point, and how in some psychological test we are saying that low score is higher happiness, or in other scales we can say high score is happiness, because it depends what is our scaling pattern and what does it mean. For example, in this case when I am saying say our scaling is not like me at all to very much like me, 1 to 5 for a statement which is positive for happiness. So, I usually feel happy. If you are saying very much like me and my scaling is 1 to 5, so then high score means more happiness. On the other hand, in another research this scale has just reversed scaling, say 1 is very much like me. So, if you are saying for positive statement of happiness very much like me, it means you are saying that you one score is, and we denoted one score. So, it means in such kind of psychological test, low score means more happiness. I think this point is very clear to you. To some extent it depends what is our scaling pattern. In some psychological test, as per this scaling pattern, low score may be high level of happiness or high score may be higher level of happiness. It depends what is our scaling pattern. I think this point should be very clear to you, and that is why when we describe particular psychological test, we usually write that higher score means or lower score means, so that reader could understand for considering higher level what does it mean, whether it is low score or it is higher score. In this series, next step is, I think, define constructs very clear to you now. Next point is write item to reflect construct. When I am saying write item to reflect construct, it means your items should be highly correlated and exactly reflection of operational definition. So, your operational definitions, main phrases of these definitions as well as its factors, and in all these items this must reflect factors explanations as well as this constructs explanation. Third point is, so once on second point you have pooled items. For example, you have number of items or questions which you want to validate here for a psychological test. Next is data collection. Then we collect data, and most of the time we collect qualitative as well as quantitative data. Quantitative data to do statistical analysis and qualitative data to know how these items or questions have been perceived by the participants. Fourth is perform item analysis. Then we do item analysis, and in this item analysis we have item total correlation, skewness of the items, and mean, standard deviation, and various other statistical techniques we use. Once we get final results, after getting these results, then we rethink about these items. How many items are working? How many items are not working? If not working, then we revise some of these items or questions. So, then we have revised psychological test. And on this revised psychological test, once again we collect new data, and after data collection we do rigorous statistical analysis. In rigorous statistical analysis means we do item total correlation, we study reliability, validity, exploratory factor analysis, and if we had already a certain level of exploration of the data, then even confirmatory factor analysis we have, item analysis, and by using various statistical techniques we document final step or final psychological test. So, then after using all those steps, this finally revealed psychological test is like standardized tool, and once we know reliability, validity and norms of these standardized tools, this particular tool can be used again and again in next researches, and you will find that these researches are actually happening in this manner only. And in next classes I will just talk about some psychological tests and then their results. So, you should know these psychological tests are different from simple questionnaires or surveys, and these are actually standardized tools, and we have actually did rigorous statistical analysis as well as research to establish a particular psychological test. Let us know a little bit more about how do we have different research questions in different settings, and how these research questions actually deal with particular research or particular research design. However, all of them have their own advantages and disadvantages. By comparing these three research design, you could easily understand how our research question is important to decide which research design will be important for us, number one, and which goals should be fulfilled by a particular research design, and what are the advantages as well as disadvantages of all three these research designs. And final message through this particular comparison is your research question would decide what is your research design and how you have to plan your research. First one is descriptive research design. Descriptive means to observe and record specific behaviors. That is our goal if we are doing descriptive research design or having descriptive research design. What are the advantages of such kind of research design? Provides a relatively complete picture of what is occurring at a given time, and itself it's describing the situation as well as its results, but does not assess relationship among variables as per this research design. On the other hand, when we are taking correlational research design, then to assess the relationships between and among two or more variables. So, our main aim or objective is to study correlation between two variables or among various variables, and then our research design is as per that requirement. And what are the advantages? Allows testing of expected relationship between and among variables and the making of predictions. So, we can talk about correlation between these variables as well as if we use regression analysis, then in terms of predicted and predictor variables, we can assure what is the percentage of variance which is shared among these variables. So, that is another point which is contributed here, but through this research design we can't talk about cause and effect as I discussed earlier also. So, causal relationship we should not infer here. For causal relationship, experimental method and experimental method must be used. In experimental method, goal is to assess the causal impact of one or more experimental manipulations or independent variables on a dependent variable. So, in this case actually we are quite clear, we have independent variables and independent variables which can be manipulated by an experimenter, and what are the impact of these independent variables on dependent variable or on the participants behavior. That is our objective, and in this case actually as I mentioned earlier also, we control all other variables or potential variables which may have impact on dependent variable. So, that is why it is very important to understand what is our research design and what kind of research findings we will be getting. So, in this case advantage is allows drawing of conclusions about the causal relationship among variables, and we can share our findings in terms of cause and effect. So, then even experimental method, however it is most scientific and most rigorous research method, it has also certain limitations or disadvantages. Number one, we cannot experimentally manipulate many important variables, that is one. Another limitation is we actually do lab testing. Lab testing means testing in artificial situation and we generalize results in natural settings. So, this is actually topmost limitation of experimental method. So, I think through this slide 3-4 points clear to us. Number one, what is your research question? This research question as well as research plan would provide you which research design would be best for you. Second point here is almost all methods have their own merits and demerits, and that is why we use mixed research methods or mixed research plan we have, which I will discuss later. What is our research process? Let us know one by one. So, this is the long journey. So, when I am saying research process, it has various steps, and these steps almost common for all research designs. First of all, we define research problem. What is our research problem? And as per this research problem, we review concepts and theories as well as previous researches on the topic. So, once we know all past history through concepts explanation as well as theories or all previous researches, it means we know each and everything about this research question, how it has been explored, how it has been studied in previous researches. Then next step is formulate hypothesis. or hypothesis formulation. So, on the basis of previous theories, models, research findings, we have hypothesis. We develop a hypothesis. A hypothesis means a tentative solution of the problem. What do you think? What would be the solution of this problem? So, you assume, you tentatively decide it should be, or it is actually solution of this problem. Then we do research, and we design research for these purposes, like sample, which research method we need to use, how this study would be conducted. So, can say rough sketch of our research here. Then we execute this research. During execution, we collect data, and after collecting this data, we analyze this data and try to find out whether our hypothesis was proved or disproved, and then we write our results or do interpretation of results, and we write report. So, this is the whole journey of doing a research. When you will find simple sentence in next classes, where for example, scholars saying that emotionally stable extroverts are happier than emotionally unstable introverts. So, for this statement or for this conclusive line, there was a whole story or long journey to say this simple conclusion. So, I think one must understand how do we do research before just thinking that, oh, it seems obvious, it is simple findings, but for these simple findings we cover a long journey of research, because we rely on objectivity, on collected data and then its analysis. Rather, we are just thinking subjectively and talking about particular results or particular findings or particular hunches. So, in next researches, you must understand this story has been step by step covered to have certain simple findings. In this course, I will discuss number of intervention programs and their effectiveness. So, that is why it is very important to know how do we do such kind of researches, so that you can easily understand results. So, let us know research design for intervention researches. In intervention researches, we do pre-testing or baseline, and then post-testing and follow-up, and in between we have intervention program. So, here simple point is, for example, I am interested to study effectiveness of a particular say meditational practice. So, our journey would be first of all pre-testing or baseline before entering for this particular meditational practice. Then second point is, participants are going through this intervention practices. In this course, I will discuss number of intervention programs as well as research is based on intervention programs. So, I think we should know which methodology we use to study effectiveness of intervention programs. In intervention programs effectiveness, there are 3-4 phases. Phase number 1, pre-testing. In pre-testing, we do testing of participants before entering in this intervention program. Then intervention programs, it means during this period they go through certain strategies or certain sessions, and then after completion of this program, post testing, and then to see stability of results, sometime we have follow up data also. So, it means the journey is pre-testing, then intervention program, then post-testing, and then follow-up, once again data collection on the same measures, so that we can compare pre-testing results with post-testing and post-testing result with follow-up as well as with pre-testing. So, in one simple research may be pre-post testing of experimental group. Second one is, in further researches, sometime we use experimental as well as control group comparison, and here objective is whether it is due to intervention program or it is just because of you are doing post testing after certain period, and this period other way also was effective and that is why it happened. So, in this case there are two groups in a controlled before after study, two or more groups, multi group intervention if we have, then maybe 2 to 3 groups in such kind of interventions, and then its comparison with control group. Control group means there was no intervention program for them, and by comparing experimental group in which an intervention is carried out and control group where no intervention is conducted, then we compare results of these two groups, and if experimental group is significantly better, then we say this intervention program was effective. Discuss this point once again in next slide once more. In some cases, along with experimental and control group, in some studies we have placebo group also. In placebo group, we just have neutral activities, and we want to see this impact is psychological or it's in real way, or in real way means it's because of pure intervention program. This point once again I will discuss with you in the next slides, especially when we compare experimental group, control group and placebo group, and then what kind of results in significant manner or its non-significant manner, and then what does it mean, what are the findings meaning when we are comparing these groups. So, then I think it will be clear to you. One more point here which is very important. Sometimes we think there could be psychological impact on results, and that is why we design single blind or double blind studies. Single blind study means participants do not know in which group they are. On the other hand, in double blind studies, even experimenter does not know what does it mean or in which group these participants are. So, if we have single or double blind studies, then we want to actually reduce psychological impact on our results. And random assignment is also very important. I will discuss this point once again with different research designs on this matter. So, I think here you would get more clarity. There could be various researches in this direction. One is one group study. One group study is we are just having pre-testing, post-testing and in between treatment or intervention program. So, we do not have any comparison group, and we are just saying that our objective is to see effectiveness by comparing pre-testing and post-testing. Second type of experimental designs may be in which two group non-random selection, pre-test post testing could be there. So, when we have say participants, these participants are not selected in a particular group on the basis of random selection. These are actually convenience, on the basis of convenience sampling. For example, if I am interested to do a research in a particular school and I am counting one class as control group and another class where I am delivering my intervention program, that is experimental group. So, in this case the classes have been selected for control group as well as experimental group. So, there is no random sampling here. On the other hand, more rigorous research method or research design could be when we have random selection also. So, two groups and we have random selection. So, for example, 50 participants were there and we randomly selected them in experimental group or in control group wherever as per their selection they are coming up. And on the basis of this random selection, we have two groups, experimental as well as control group, and then we conduct our research. So, I think this point is very clear to you. Control group means there is no treatment or there is no intervention program in psychological terms. In experimental group, we have particular program for them and we want to study whether this program has been effective or not. When we have comparison of these three groups, then we may get various notions, and I think it will be very clear to you if you know what does it mean if we get significant difference between two groups. And what does it mean if we do not get significant differences in these two groups. And through this there are various points which would be clear to you. Number one, why do we have different groups, and what does it mean if results showing significance or non-significance results. Let us compare first control versus experimental group comparison. You know, Experimental group means where we had treatment or intervention program. On the other hand, control group, there is no activity in between. So, if we get significant difference between these two groups, then we can say program is effective, because whatever happened, it happened in experimental group only. On the other hand, if there is no significant difference between control group and experimental group, it means program is not effective, and there is no significant changes as per this experimental or this intervention program. Second comparison could be control versus placebo group. You know, control group means no activity. Placebo group means certain neutral activities which are neutral but not like experimental group, where we are saying that these would be very effective and have positive impact or enhance happiness or maybe mindfulness or resilience. So, I think at this point of time, just simply understand difference between these groups in terms of significance level and non-significance level. These intervention programs could be discussed in next classes. So, when I am saying control versus placebo group, control group no activity, placebo group neutral activities. So, if there is significant difference, then there may be psychological effects, because you participated or participants participated in certain activities. That is why psychologically they are thinking that that's impact, there should be some impact, and that is why they are showing changed score. It is just like no medicine or sugar coated medicine. So, if it is sugar coated medicine and have impact, it means it is not because of medicine, because that was not medicine, but that was because of psychological effects. You thought you took medicine and that is why you should have impact on it. Non-significant differences, no psychological effects are there. So, if you get there is no significant difference between control group and placebo group. When we compare placebo with experimental group, no psychological effects are there. It means, so if good impact or influence only in experimental group, it means it is because of real one or real intervention program. On the other hand, if it say no significant difference, it means there are two options: psychological effects are there or program is not effective. So, then you have to do some further research. If we just understand this phenomena with the medical science, so placebo group means sugar coated medicines and experimental group means real medicine. So, if there is significant difference between two, then we are saying that there is no psychological effect, but it is because of the real medicine. It is not because of sugar coated, it is because of real medicine impact is there. On the other hand, when we say no significant difference, it means whether this medicine was not effective or there was psychological effect in this study, and that is why this placebo sugar coated medicines versus real medicine, there is no significant difference between two, and we need to reveal these factors further. After knowing all research methods, what would you say? Which one is best one? My answer is no one. Each method has its own advantages and disadvantages, and it depends which is your research plan, and as per this plan which is best research method for you, but all these methods have their own advantages and disadvantages. That is why in some researches we prefer to use mixed methodology. This mixed methodology in terms of parallel versus sequential mode. Parallel, when I am saying parallel, it means you have some questions on for capturing qualitative level, qualitative data, and others for quantitative data. And I will discuss such kind of research in future, and then I will discuss with you whether this is parallel or sequential mode. In sequential mode, in your research plan you have 3 to 4 studies. Study number 1 best explored by one research method, second one by the another one, and third by the next one. This way we use of quantitative as well as qualitative research methods in a single research, and through this mixed methodology we get more reliable and valid results because they are overcoming each other's disadvantages. Another very important point for us is ethical issues in researches with humans. We are supposed to follow various ethical guidelines, as well as nowadays before starting research we should get approval from ethics committee approval, and we present our research plan there, and then they assure we are following ethical guidelines. Mainly there are 5-6 points which we should consider when we are doing research. Number 1, informed consent. You should take consent, you should describe your research a little bit, main objective of your research, what is your research agenda, and then take participants consent, and they know what are you doing, how you are collecting data, how this data will be used in future, and then they give consent to use for your research purposes. Second point is withdrawal. Any point of time participants can withdraw from this research, and you also assure at any point they are able to, and they could do if they want in future. Confidentiality of the data is also very important. You can use it for research purposes, but you cannot give it to the other people. There are some dilemmas in which they are saying, for example, psychological testing was done for research purposes and now employer asking to put in their personal files. That cannot be happen because confidentiality is there, and one must do as per this confidentiality, and there is no scope to leak their data. Deception. In some researches we observed that if participants know about the objectives of these researches, then there could be negative impact of. For example, if we are testing someone's anxiety level, stress level, depression level, and we think if we are saying that your anxiety, stress or tension level would be measured, then may have negative impact on our results. So, then we could hide actual message, but at the end of the study it should be debriefed. You are telling about the research, and then you are taking once again their consent to use this data in your researches. Next point is protection of participants. So, during experiments one has to protect their rights, their protection is very important, and researcher must take care of this protection. In positive psychology we have borrowed some new methods also. These new methods help us to understand human behavior in positive manner. One of them is appreciative inquiry. Appreciative inquiries, specific techniques and operational steps that are used to bring about positive changes in a system, and for this purpose we explore appreciative inquiry in positive manner. It has 4 Ds. First D is discovery. When we say discovery, it means what gives life the best of what it is. Appreciating, and with this motion it starts. Then next is dream. What might be? Imagine what the world is calling for, envisioning. So, that is next step. Third is design. How can it be? Determining the ideal. It means co-constructing the positive direction. And fourth, destiny. What will be? How to empower, learn and adjust or improvise or sustaining. So, broadly it is focus on positive directions in terms of appreciating, envisioning, co-constructing and sustaining the patterns. And this technique has been borrowed from the existing psychology, and we are using it in positive psychology also. There are few type of immersive technologies, modern techniques I should say. For example, virtual reality, a digital environment that replaces the user's physical surroundings, And through virtual reality, we are trying to give better quality of life, higher education, higher happiness, and higher way of living. Another one is augmented reality. In this reality, digital content that is superimposed over a live stream of the physical environment. And sometimes we use mixed reality, an integration of virtual content and the real world environment that enable interaction among elements of both. So, positive psychology uses immersive technology, virtual reality along with augmented reality that offers a whole new array of research opportunities, and such kind of opportunities help us to understand higher level of say well-being with the help of technology. In some cases we use big data sets also. You know, big data in various researches or in various fields doing well and having a very strong impact. So, machine learning predictive algorithms are important to learn even human behavior and human behavior in positive direction. So, predictive algorithms are perhaps most frequently encountered as continuously improving decision and suggestion system that decode patterns from millions of users interactions, and such kind of interactions are being used in positive psychology also. A large impact on well-being intervention and measurement can be done using such kind of algorithms. And nowadays you must have observed there are various applications, mobile applications, applications on computer, social robots are there, artificial intelligence is being used for having better well-being. So, in all these techniques we also trying to understand how positive psychological changes we may have in future by using technology. For example, health coaching algorithms will be able to give tailored advice on how to increase one's well-being, and there are some applications. For example, if you had disturbed sleep and then message through this application is sleep more. Your correspondence with someone increases your stress levels and you are quite stressed now, and mobile applications sending message to you calm you down and lift your mood. So, these are certain biofeedback or feedback which is helping us to have better well-being. I hope you must have learned about various research methods, and this learning will help you to understand next classes messages in terms of different researches as well as effectiveness of intervention programs. To know a little bit more, you may watch some videos in which some experiments are available on YouTube. For example, Bobo-doll experiment, in which it has been focused that how aggression can be learned through modeling, through social modeling. Marshmallow experiment, in which researcher has focused on immediate versus delayed gratification. You can watch some more Skinner's operant conditioning experiments as well as some other social experiments which are available on YouTube to know more about psychological experiments as well as testing. I have selected here marshmallow experiment for you because it is very interesting. I hope you would enjoy it. Thank you very much.
It's good. Okay, so here's the deal. There's a marshmallow. You can either wait and I'll bring you back another one, so you can have two, or you can eat it now. So you can eat it now, or you can wait and I'll bring you back two. Okay? Okay, I'll be back. Okay, so I have one marshmallow for each of you.
Okay.
One.
Don't eat it?
And here's the deal. You can either eat it now, or you can wait till I get back and you can have two. Okay?
Okay.
So eat it now or wait till I get back and you can have two. And I'll be back in a little
If we wait, you'll give us two?
Yep, if you wait, you get two. Or you can eat it now, whichever you want. Okay? I'll be
We're
back in a
gonna
little bit.
wait. We're gonna wait. I wonder what we're gonna do. Are you gonna eat it? If I want to eat one thing. Well, we're still not gonna get two. But if you wait and until she gets back, she'll give you 2. She still won't give you 2 because you ate it. Some of it. And I didn't eat a single bite of mine. So don't show her, okay?
There you go. Okay, so I have this marshmallow, and you can eat it now, or if you wait a little bit, I'll bring back 2 for you to eat, okay? How you doing, Sam? Good. You've been eating. Okay, well, I'm gonna go and I haven't found marshmallows yet, so I'm gonna look for some more, but you stay here, and if you haven't eaten that one, I'll bring you back another one, okay? I'll be right back.
Waiting. Well, you're eating, not waiting for her to give back. I still ate some of it, so she's still not gonna give it to her.